All right, let's rock and roll. Let's do this. This is Scott Sambucci, and you are here to learn how to fill your sales pipeline without wasting time. Thanks so much for everybody checking in. This is me. I know a bunch of you on the webinar. I recognize a lot of names, a couple clients, a couple folks I've worked with in the past different workshops. So this is me. I'm Scott Sambucci. I'm the CEO and founder of Sales Qualia. And as we dive in, I want to just share a couple of quick rules that I like to share with everyone on the webinars that I lead. So the first rule is that right now, this very second, I know that probably some of you have running in the background your email, your CRM, or something else. And so I kind of have this rule on whether I'm teaching a class, teaching a workshop, whatever it is, that I like to focus on now and worry about later. So I ask you that we're going to be going through a ton of content. I'm going to be going really, really fast. And so in order to make sure you're catching everything that I'm throwing at you, I highly suggest closing your email, put your phone into your airplane mode, whatever it is, just so that you can focus on all the great content I'm about to bring to you. Secondly, the second rule is that I do speak pretty quickly. I do go pretty quickly. I'm also pretty direct throughout the course of the webinar today. I'm going to be asking you a couple of questions. I definitely, absolutely, positively need you to respond back to those questions. It helps me know that you're checking in, that you're focused, and it also helps me to answer questions that you're going to have along the way. So the past couple of webinars that I've had, I've done my best to answer questions, and this one in particular, I've made sure to take some time at the end of the webinar in order to make sure that I can answer any questions that you have about the content and anything else that we're going to be going through today. Okay? So as we get going, as we start off the webinar, if you guys wouldn't mind, I've got a couple of quick questions that I'd like to ask you. The first thing I ask you is, can you hear my voice? I checked in with a couple of people already before we got started. I want to make sure that everyone can hear my voice. So if you wouldn't mind finding the question panel or the chat box or something, just let me know that you can hear me loud and clear. Getting lots of yeses. Awesome. Great. Thanks. And so in the topic and the time that we're going to be covering today on how to fill your sales pipeline without wasting time, there's three main areas that we're going to be focusing on. So the first one is how to evaluate your RAP. How to evaluate your RAP, and it's not the kind of RAP that you think I might be talking about. The second is we're going to be talking about the importance of a prospecting plan of action. And third, we're going to talk about how to do what I call permission-based selling. So those are going to be the three major topics that we're going to go through, and each one will be going through in lots and lots of detail. So get your notebook out, take some notes. If you have, and there's some people use Evernote for this kind of stuff. And make sure that you are taking notes, and if you have any questions, write a note to yourself that, hey, I got this question, and put it in the chat box. If I don't get to it right away while I'm in the middle of the presentation, then like I said, I'll do some pauses along the way, and at the end, I've blocked out some time to do some Q&A. So we've got about an hour together. That's what we have scheduled. And know that in the time that we have, in that next 57 minutes or so, you will definitely get everything that I can give you in that time that we have. And at the end, I'm going to show you how to get more help with some of this sales pipeline prospecting and basically your sales process if you want it, only if you want it, okay? So if that's okay with everyone, then let's jump in and let's dive into what we're going to be covering today. Also, I wanted to mention to stick around at the end. So as we go through the topics and the conversation, I know some people ask about getting copies of the slides, or I oftentimes will refer to worksheets or different tools that I use with clients that I work with. And if there are any particular tools or worksheets or frameworks that I mentioned that you want to get a copy of, just remind me at the end, and I'll make sure to show you how you can get a copy of those or how I'll be sending those out to everyone. Okay? So I want to start off with a question to you before we dive into the content. So let me ask you this question. What's the hardest thing that you find about, or what's the hardest part about filling your sales pipeline? So specifically thinking about, thinking about your sales pipeline at your company, what do you feel like is the most difficult part of the sales process for you, like generating that sales process? What's the hardest part about filling your sales pipeline? There must be some kind of a reason that you hopped on this webinar to learn a couple ideas here. And so targeting the right audience, yeah, absolutely. Kiri, absolutely, that's a tough one. Being diligent, yeah, so being disciplined. Jenny, yep, That's a tough one, especially if we're a small company or a startup. A lot of times we're wearing many hats, and it's tough to be able to monitor that. What else? What else is hard about filling your sales? What else is filling your sales pipeline is difficult? So Jack says lead gen. Yeah, so just getting people into the top of the funnel, people to talk to in the first place, definitely a big challenge. Absolutely. Good. Great. So let me ask you a second question. If there is one emotion or one outcome that you would like to get out of our time today, what would that be? What is one outcome, or what is one deliverable for yourself? If you took time out of your day, you're hopping on this webinar, what's one outcome or one emotion that you want to get out of our time today? Go ahead and type that into the chat box or into the question box. What's one outcome? Food for thought, no specific outcome. All right, Kenny, well, you would definitely get some plenty of food for thought, that's for sure. I'm sure of that. What else? What is one outcome? What emotion? What about, is it something about the sales prospecting process that's difficult that you want to try to get answered? A good email template. So what does it take to create a good email template? How to create a good email template? It's a good one, yeah. Qualifying it as a real lead. Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great one, Claire. So what's tough about especially working at a startup is, there's lots and lots and lots of people that are really interested in learning about the product, and we have to figure out who's a real early adopter, who's an innovator at their respective company. So we're going to be the people we could really partner with as we're selling our product and implementing that. Techniques to fill sales pipeline. Yeah, a good one as well. Good job. Great. So let me ask you one more question. And if you look at your company, if you look at your team, and you look at where you are, where does your company need to be? Where does your startup need to be from a revenue standpoint by, say, the end of September? So we look ahead to the end of, we're coming up to middle of May now, so it's about 4.5 months. If you think ahead to the 4.5 months, where does your company need to be in terms of revenue? And secondly, where are you now in terms of revenue? Where are you now relative to that goal? So I work with a lot of startups, and there's these revenue targets that we set up for ourselves that maybe we set up at the beginning of the year, in January, and by September or by the end of the year, I'd like to be earning X dollars. So have a number of customers. Well, we are getting close to mid-year. This is a place where a lot of times we have to think about the reset button. So where does your company need to be in terms of revenue, and where are you relative to that right now? Just put that in the chat box and answer that question. Where are you now, and where do you feel like you need to be? I got a trigger finger here. That's going a little quick. Sorry about that, guys. Yeah, good. So getting a lot of folks that are saying we're behind goals. Yeah. Other folks, yeah, we're breaking already, but we need to build one more key account. So that's actually really insightful. If you think about what you need, if you think about where you need, a lot of times you can spend a lot of time with a bunch of small accounts, or if you focus all of your efforts on getting one big one, that can even override the need for getting a bunch of small ones. So getting catching up on a couple of things. So good. So as we dive in here to some content, I wanted to kind of share a little bit as to why I feel like this topic is particularly important. So, I spent a lot of time selling software to the banking sector, and one of the things that I always found challenging working at startups, I've worked at 3 different startups, is how do you figure out where to spend your time and what activities you could be spending that time on. And so when I look back at some time that I spent most recently at Blend, my job was to go out and find customers for the company. And in a little while, I'm going to kind of talk through how I was able to break that out and procedurally, step by step, through some frameworks, be able to start identifying what is our prospecting plan of action, what is our RAP, which I'll talk about in just a minute, and ultimately, how did we use how do we use our content and our expertise in the market as a way to do some permission-based selling. So let's dive in and get to the crux of the content here. So this is us blasting off with some of the key topics that I want to cover today. So firstly, one of the things that can be really, really frustrating when you're going out there and prospecting for your company is that there are a lot of places, there are a lot of choices as to where to spend your time, right? There's obviously LinkedIn, there's conferences, there are webinars that you can do like this one, there's cold calling that I know a lot of people like to do or try to do, or they feel like they should be doing that. You look around and you see colleagues or peers in your market or people that you have kind of grown up with in the startup market. You're like, man, the other guy needs to know what's going on. Why don't I just do what that person's doing, right? And it's hard to know exactly like what's the best thing for me. It feels like a shell game sometimes. You've got all these different opportunities to do your prospecting. You're trying to figure out like what's the right way, what's the right place for me to be spending my time and my efforts, right? And what's worse is, like we said, we're midway through the year, getting close to midway through the year, and you could be spending a lot of effort running this race, and you wake up each week or each month or each quarter or at the end of the year and you say, man, I put in a lot of effort trying to find customers, but I didn't quite get the results that I wanted. So what I found that most people want is kind of a knob they can turn. They want to know if I spend a little bit of time here and crank it up just a little bit, I'm going to get a few more results than I'm spending less time, right? Obviously, people talk about they want a framework. They want something that they know that when I go in there and I'm spending time on certain aspects of the prospecting process, that it's really clear what I should be doing each and every day, each and every week, in every different place where I am prospecting, right? And we also, of course, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do here is get happy customers. And whether you're looking for your first customer or you have a handful of customers, you kind of get to the magic number of the first 10 happy customers. That's ultimately the reason why we're going out there and doing this prospecting. And what that's going to allow us to do once you get to that point is to really scale out the organization. So you have a path to get from 10 customers to 100. And you've got real validation around your business. You've got real validation around your product. And so that brings us to the very first topic that I want to talk about, which is what is your wrap? What is your wrap? And when we're talking about wrap, we're not talking about this kind of wrap. So I am an M&M fan. I love listening to them when I'm getting some work done. The wrap that I'm talking about here is what's your revenue acquisition portfolio? What's your revenue acquisition portfolio? And I'm going to define this in just a bit, and then this will, I think, start to give you some frameworks to use when you start considering how and where to be spending your prospecting time. So what's your revenue acquisition portfolio? So what exactly is this thing? What is this idea of a revenue acquisition portfolio? So it's pretty simple. If you think about, and there's kind of a little pie chart here, if you think about the way that an investment portfolio is set up, I know a lot of people, you might have an old 401k from a job, or you've got a retirement portfolio that you built up. And your financial advisors or all the financial advice out there talks about how to diversify your portfolio in a few places, right? You want to maybe invest some of your money in the S&P 500 to get some general market risk exposure. You might have some money in a low risk kind of bond. Maybe you've got some international stocks, right? So that's your portfolio. And the portfolio itself is designed to give you what's called a risk-return trade-off, right? So for a little bit of risk, I should get the subsequent amounts of return for the risk that I'm putting in. So if I go ahead and put a bunch of money in an international stock that's focusing on African or Middle Eastern startups, well, that's a huge amount of risk, but I might be willing to put that money there if I know the potential return is really, really high, right? And so if we consider this idea of a portfolio, and instead of talking about money that we're investing for our retirement, we instead kind of just very subtly shift money and replace that with time. As an entrepreneur, as a startup, probably our most precious resource, our most scarce resource is time. And so when you think about applying this concept of a portfolio, an acquisition portfolio, what we're talking about here is when we are spending our time, when we're investing our time in any one activity, are we getting a subsequent and expected return on that investment, right? So if I am spending a lot of time on LinkedIn, sending out emails and trying to connect with people, well, there's an endless number of millions and millions and millions of people on LinkedIn, and even if I'm really good at searching in on LinkedIn within a certain market, within a certain kind of executive, within a specific segment, there's still going to be hundreds or even thousands of people, right, to go after. So it could be one thing to go spend a bunch of time trying to ping people and get them to connect with you and then engage in a conversation. But if we're spending, 5 hours a day doing that, but not getting the return on that time investment, at some point we have to say, the time investment is not a very sound way to be spending that time, right? Does that make sense so far? Real quick, I just want to do a quick check-in for people because that is kind of a new idea here. This idea of a revenue acquisition portfolio, conceptually, does this make sense to you? Like, can you imagine for yourself where and how you're spending time in your own business, how it might correlate to this idea of an investment portfolio? So I got yes and an exclamation point. Yep, makes sense, says John. Cool, thanks. And so when we're thinking about how we want to build our sales process, one of the things, the first thing we want to do is analyze our pipeline. And by analyzing our pipeline, however big or small it is, however robust or sparse it might be, you can both analyze your pipeline and any existing customers you have. And let's take a look at what was the source? How did I find those people? How did I get them into my sales pipeline, right? So that's the very first step, is analyze your pipeline and say, interesting. So I've got one company that I work with called Doculus, and I had a strategy call yesterday with the CEO, entrepreneur, and we kind of went through his pipeline, and it's like, all right, this is really strong. You've got some really big deals in here. Where did you get these deals? Like, how did you get them to start? And he said, well, he's kind of a more senior guy. He's worked at places like EMC and a couple of other big companies, Adobe. And he said, look, I just started using my network, and 100% of my sales pipeline is coming from people that I know or introductions that I'm getting. So in that sense, he's investing all of his time just working through his networks, working through his connections to get introductions to key executives for the product that he's selling, and that is what's filling up his pipeline. Now, if all of a sudden he said, well, look, Scott, I'm thinking about spending a whole bunch of time on LinkedIn, even though I'm spending a bunch of time on LinkedIn now, and now I'm thinking about doing Facebook ads because I think I should be doing Facebook ads to reach people. My first reaction would be, well, why would you want to do that? Right? If you're investing time and the time that you're investing is yielding you the return of solid opportunities in your pipeline, people that want to run pilot programs with you, that don't spend time on other activities. And eventually, yes, you want to think about ways that you can bridge out, start doing other things. We'll talk about some strategies for that in a little while. But first and foremost, analyze your pipeline and figure out where are your best deals or your best opportunities or your best customers coming from, and make sure you're absolutely positively spending time doing that. And that brings us to the second principle, which is do what works. So if something is working for you, continue to do that thing, and don't just chase the shiny red ball just because you heard that somebody else is having good success with Twitter ads, right? And thirdly, just remember that your time is money. So everything that you're doing should be focused around maximizing that return on your time investment. So that's what I mean by revenue acquisition portfolio. And so another example of this, and a different client that I was working with is called Soon. Soon, of all things in the world, they are tahini sauce producers. Right? They're a food company based in Philadelphia. And yesterday, I sat down with their CEO, Shelby, and we kind of went through her customer portfolio. We went through and did this revenue acquisition portfolio exercise. And basically, the revenue that she has coming into the company is really coming from three places. So the first is through food distributors. So they sell their product in bulk to food distributors who then resell that product to restaurants that are using tahini sauce. So you can imagine like a Mediterranean restaurant, a leisure restaurant where tahini sauce is kind of a staple of the dishes that are being prepared. So they sell to distributors because distributors have access to those restaurants, right? So that's one place where they're spending a lot of time and getting a lot of the revenue. The second place they've been spending time is trying to directly sell to restaurants. So while some restaurants buy from distributors, Student Foods is saying, well, why don't we just go find some really well-known restaurants and spend a lot of time and effort getting our TV sauce, getting them to buy it directly, because the distributors themselves, they're covering hundreds or even thousands of different products, so it's really hard for them to know a lot about our one product. So we're kind of experts in the product that we can sell directly to restaurants, especially kind of like fast casual and upscale restaurants that really have to pay for good tahini sauce. Then we can kind of leverage our expertise to get those people, those restaurants to buy. So we kind of circumvent the distributor line in that those distributors aren't spending the right amount of time selling our product that hundreds of others sell. Instead, we'll just be the expert to sell our product directly to the restaurant. So, okay, sounds interesting. And then the third place that they get a lot of the revenue is directly online, so consumer sales. So if you go to Amazon, search soon for search tahini, then you'll see their product pop up. And it turns out that's a fairly significant part of their total company revenue right now. So as we went through this, I said, okay, well, what's your return on investment for the time that you're spending? So you have to spend a lot of time with distributors to make sure they understand the product, to make sure they're carrying us, to make sure they're able to send this perishable product to the right people at the right places. So, yeah, we spend a lot of time, but it's a big part of our revenue. And even one of our distributors right now, they can sell hundreds of thousands of dollars of this tahini sauce to their customers, and right now we're just about a third of that. Right, so there's major upside just within one distributor if we continue to spend a lot of time and show them how they can be doing more in selling our product. So I'm like, okay, cool. Sounds like if you spend a lot of time there, it makes sense. The upside is huge. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, even with just one distributor. So then we went back and said, okay, well, tell me more about this restaurant sale. And they said, well, we just feel like there's certain restaurants we'd love to have as almost like logos on our website. We like to say like certain really great restaurants in cities like Chicago and Philadelphia and New York are using our tahini. But the problem is we spend a ton of time in these restaurants trying to get them to buy our stuff, and at the end of the day, it's just not a lot of tahini that one restaurant can buy. So I was like, okay. And then we talked about the consumer sales, and it turns out those have been going up every single month without them spending any time at all on this. And it's been going up because their product is mentioned by a top chef who wrote a cookbook. And so all of a sudden people are buying this cookbook, and in the cookbook he's recommending this particular sauce, and there's like correlations of getting people to buy their product. So I said, okay, so if we look at your revenue acquisition portfolio, you're spending a lot of time with distributors, as you should, because that's a huge upside for you. But you're also spending a lot of time on restaurants, and that's not a big upside for you. Thirdly, what's even better, you're not spending a lot of time on the consumer market, but you're getting some bang for your buck. So why don't we just shift the amount of time that you're spending on restaurants and instead either focus more time on the distributors or more time really learning how to ramp up these consumer sales and just get away from trying to waste that time focused on those restaurants that just aren't giving you the bang for the buck. So it's just a practical application. So if you think about your business, and this one I ask you is if you think about your business, and you think about the way that you're spending your time from a prospecting standpoint, how could this fundamentally shift the way that you're doing your work? Right? Do you even know? Do you know what your revenue portfolio is? If you did, what kind of impact that for you? I want to hear on this in this case. I want to hear if you were. First of all, do you know what your revenue acquisition portfolio is? And secondly, if you did, what kind of impact does that for you in your business? What kind of impact would that have? And typing those out is, if you think about the time you may have spent that didn't get your returns, how much time might have you wasted by not spending time in the right places, in the places that are getting you the return on investment. So one person saying mostly inbound existing relationships didn't get the right numbers. So 80% is coming from inbound and existing relationships. So this is the case much like the company Doculus I mentioned a little bit earlier, where he's getting a lot of stuff from existing relationships, connections, and then mostly inbound. So that's a good example of if 80% of your business is coming from inbound and existing relationships. And if you're happy with those types of customers, if the inbound opportunities that are coming in are good ones, right? And if the existing relationships are introducing you to the right new clients, then yes, continue doubling down on that. And that's 80% of your business. Well, is there another place where you might think about experimenting, which is what we're going to talk about next, in order to continue to round out that acquisition portfolio so that you're optimizing your time, is the way we want to think about it, right? We want to make sure that we're getting the right return for whatever time investment we're making. Cool. So one thing I like to do is ask people, look, I mean, if you think about this concept of revenue portfolio, and I ask you to kind of, okay, I'm going to draw a line in the sand. You can either kind of keep doing it the old way or do it the new way. The old way being, I'm not really sure where that time is going. I know I should be doing one thing or another thing, but I'm not sure if it's effective or not. I haven't really measured it. Or you can do it the new way, which is really focusing in on being clear on the return on investment you're getting for your time. Which would you choose? Like, which is better, right? Old way or new way? And here you type in the box there. Which is better, old way or new way? It's a new concept for a lot of people. When I share it with them, it's the first time they've kind of thought about their revenue acquisition or thought about their customer acquisition or prospecting activities in this way. Yeah, new way. People, new way. Yep, absolutely. So that's the very first thing I would say is, from an action item standpoint, go and analyze your existing pipeline. If you already have some customers, go and analyze where you got those customers. And if they're great customers, then go do more of that. If you have some customers that are not so great, go see if there's some trend there. Is there something around the current customers you have, or even sales opportunities you have in the pipeline right now? Do you have some sales opportunities in your pipeline that maybe you're like, I guess it would be good to have them as a customer because we need the revenue? But on the other hand, I kind of get the feeling that this customer might be a pain in the neck, or they might be really heavy on support, or they might want me to do a bunch of product changes that I really can't afford to do. And go and look and see what the source of those customers or the source of those opportunities are in your pipeline. Because you might see that there's a correlation between, hey, I'm getting some good leads from one place, and the other places where I'm getting leads may not be yielding me the right business, that I'm getting bad leads, or people that are kind of asking a lot from me more than I can keep them. So that's the first area I want to talk about in terms of filling your pipeline without wasting time. Is make sure that you understand your revenue acquisition portfolio and take a good look at analyzing where you're spending your time now and where you could and should be spending your time going forward. So that's the first principle that I want to cover today. Let's move on to the second one. Is everybody good so far? I'll just do a quick pause. Any questions on that I can answer beyond what I've already gone through? Any questions? Nope. No. Okay. Cool. No questions. Cool. All right. Awesome. Let's go on to number 2. So the second thing that I want to talk about is the prospecting plan of action. And the reason this gets really important is that it's really tough when you're busy, right? If you're a small team, or even a single person CEO, single person entrepreneur, right? You've got a ton of different things to do, right? There's your product, there's engineering, you might be trying to hire, you might be trying to raise capital, and you've got to do everything else that a startup CEO has to do, right? And a lot of times it feels like you could be spinning your wheels in a certain way of prospecting, whether that's like blasting emails or spending time on LinkedIn or trying to go to conferences and events, but you're not getting the replies or the results that you want. And ultimately, you keep trying these different things, but you're not really clear as to what seems to be working and what doesn't seem to be working, right? And I think like one of the biggest fears is that you get to the situation where you're doing a lot of this work, and you know, like fundamentally, you just like this problem exists. That's why you started your company or you built your product. But when you do your outreach, you're not getting the replies. It makes you feel like, man, is there anybody out there? Am I just way off? Did I just misunderstand the size or magnitude or scope of the problem, the way that people want to solve it, right? And so I think when I talk to people, I talk to entrepreneurs, a lot of times what they tell me is, like, there's a couple things that we really, really want. Like, one, I just want a clear plan. Like, I've never done a bunch of selling before. I've never been an enterprise salesperson. I know I need to be selling into these big companies. I just don't know how to do it, right? Secondly, I want to have a consistent flow of new leads coming in every week or every month. I don't want a situation where, okay, I spend some time prospecting and then, after 3 or 4 weeks of that, then I go and do selling, and then as I'm doing selling and trying to get some new customers converted, meanwhile, I'm not doing any prospecting, don't have any new leads coming in. And then after some of these deals close or don't close, now I'm kind of stuck starting all over again. So it's a more sequential process as opposed to constantly and consistently having a flow of leads coming in. And ultimately, I also want to get to a tool belt. We want to know, like, hey, as I am doing my prospecting, there's some things I'm going to do that I know are working for me. I also want to keep building that out. I want to add new elements to my repertoire, right? I want new tools to add to my prospecting tool belt so that ultimately I can build this repeatable system that you can hand over to a sales team or a marketing team to help you do that prospecting, to help you do your selling for you. Most startup CEOs are not planning to do sales over the long run. Your job is to get that first customer, those first 10 customers, and then start building the team that can take this over for you, right? So a couple key principles when it comes to building out your prospecting plan of action. So the first thing you want to do is make sure we're scheduling time each and every week for prospecting. And I'm going to get to some examples of this and why this is really important. A lot of times when I ask people, look, show me your calendar, like where are your blocks of time you are focused on doing your prospecting? A lot of times people can't show me, right? So prospecting becomes the thing to do when all of a sudden I'm in a panic and I realize I don't have any good leads in my pipeline, or it's something I do maybe just before a conference or just after a conference I'm planning to go to, or I've got a couple of meetings, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, so I'm going to grab an hour to hop on LinkedIn. I'm going to hop on some other website and try to do some prospecting, right? So first and foremost, what I tell people is you have to schedule your prospecting time and never ever move it. Like, this is as critical to your business as it. Like, you would never, if a customer said to you, hey, I'm really close to buying your product and I want to have one last conversation with you in order to get from your prospect to close, and you say, great, we'll schedule a meeting at 12 o'clock on Friday to talk about that, well, you would never ever move that meeting, right? You would say, no, that's like a critical meeting for me. That's a critical part of the sales process. If I don't have that meeting, I can't get that customer from interested to close, right? The same goes with prospecting. Prospecting is just as important to your sales process. So you have to schedule that time, and never move it, just like you would never move that end of funnel meeting. And I think this is some disconnect when people feel like, well, yeah, I'll do prospecting when I can have time for it, but if you don't do your prospecting, then you're never going to get to those meetings that are going to lead from interested customers to close. So that's the very first thing when you're thinking about your plan of action, your prospecting plan of action is to schedule time every week. So the second thing that you want to do is start to experiment. So in the first section, we talked about revenue acquisition portfolio and talked about make sure you do what's working and avoid those things which aren't working, right? Well, secondly, as you're building up your plan of action, you want to make sure that you are experimenting in a logical way. And I usually tell people about once a month, maybe it's once every 2 months, maybe it's every 6 weeks. You want to pick one new prospecting avenue for yourself and be really, really clear to measure. This is the third principle on your plan of action, is to measure your results. So, for example, if you are planning to, for example, I've only done inbound stuff, I've only done referrals and introductions from my network. And now what I want to do is start thinking about going to conferences and events in my industry and using that as a part of my revenue acquisition portfolio. But I'm just not sure if that's going to be really good for me or not. So if you're thinking about that as an experiment, what I would say is pick not just one event and then show up and hope that you get some results. Instead, I would say maybe pick 2 or 3 events. Go there with that event. Go to that event. Go to that conference with a really clear plan, setting up meetings with the right people ahead of time, having those meetings, and then measuring your pull-through. So you could go to a conference, if you have 10 meetings, how many of those meetings led to real sales opportunities? Is it 1? Is it 0? Is it 5? Right? So being super diligent about measuring those results, whether that experiment that you're running is trying out conferences or trying out a webinar or building out a white paper or spending time on Facebook ads or spending time doing LinkedIn ads, whatever that is, make sure that you go in with a really clear plan of what your experiment is going to be and how you're going to measure those results. Okay. So to give you an example of this on how I kind of overcame this, I mentioned earlier the work that I did at Blend. And one of the things that was really interesting for me is that I found that of all the times of the week for me to do my meeting, setting up meetings for the next week or setting up meetings at a conference I was going to, I was generally doing some prospecting in order to try to get some quick, early conversations with people. This is a coffee shop in the town where I live. It's called Cloud Forest Cafe. And one afternoon, one weekend, I was just way behind. I had a bunch of stuff that came up at work that I had to handle. Employee number 11, so I was doing a lot of product stuff. I was doing even QA testing, some engineering. And we had this big conference coming up in about a week. And I realized that, man, I signed up for this conference. I bought a plane ticket. I have a hotel. And I don't have any meetings set up. So I just told my wife, look, I'm going to go grab a couple of hours over at the coffee shop. And I'm just going to start sending out some invites to people to see if I can get some meetings. I'm sitting there and I'm hammering through a double espresso and this list of people that were going to this conference. I sorted them by title, make sure I was high-level executives. I was going to the LinkedIn profile to make sure they would be potentially good early adopters based on background, based on experience. And I started sending out these meeting invites. You know, hey, I'm going to be at this conference. I saw that you have this background. Would love to spend 6 minutes to be at this conference, kind of going through the template, this email that I'm sending out. And while I'm at like email 6, 7, 8, I start getting a reply back. I got a reply back from the first one I sent like an hour earlier. It's like, whoa, that's really weird. So by the time I had spent 3 hours in this coffee shop, I'd sent out about 15 or 20 people reaching out on LinkedIn, sending emails where I had email addresses. And just that one afternoon, I ended up booking 4 meetings for myself for that conference. And then it dawned on me, based on a separate conversation I had with a friend of mine who runs he's the CEO of a pretty large privately owned company. And I'd asked him in the past, I'm like, hey, Brian, how do you manage your time? Like, how do you manage your time throughout the course of the week? And so one of the things for me is that Sunday afternoons is kind of like catch up and planning day for work. So Saturdays I leave for family, go to baseball games, go to soccer games, do all that stuff. Sunday afternoon, even if I'm watching sports on TV or something else, I'll just crack with my laptop. And I'm trying to catch up on emails the previous week, and I'm trying to plan ahead for next week because it's my uninterrupted time. So oh man. So these bank executives that are trying to target probably doing this in Brian's, which is they're actually on their phone, they're checking email on Sunday, they're trying to plan out their week. And it turned out for me, from a plan of action standpoint, it turned out to be a really, really cool part of the sales process for me as part of my prospecting plan of action. So as part of my tool belt, as part of the way and time I was spending my time, it wasn't every afternoon. About once a month, I would just go grab my laptop, my son would go down and take a nap. I tell my wife I'm going to head over to the coffee shop, and every 3 or 4 weeks, it's been 2 or 3 hours just doing that as my prospecting time to set up meetings for the next week, set up meetings for the next conference. Okay, so the same goes as I thought through. Okay, now we're starting to do these conferences. Am I getting bang for the buck? Well, from an experimental standpoint, this is in the mortgage industry. As you can see, they have meetings and conferences all the time. So what we were able to do in a very compressed period of time, over the course of about 3 months, from February through February, March, April. This is back in 2014, 2015. Each year, we basically said, we're going to pick 3 or 4 conferences. We're going to go to those conferences. We're going to set up meetings, and then we're going to get new leads into the pipeline based on meeting these people for the first time. And it turned out that conferences, because we got good at it, we figured out what message was resonating. We figured out what executives we should be talking to. A lot of times they couldn't talk to one executive at the first conference, but then they were at the next conference, and they remembered that I sent them a meeting invite for the first conference. So from a plan of action standpoint, we ran this experiment in a way. We're going to invest time and money learning how to go to conferences, and that turned out to be an important part of our revenue acquisition portfolio. So I kind of want to express this as a way that how the first two kind of tie together. First is you want to figure out what's working, and if you're not even sure what's working, that's where you have to be running this experiment. That's where you have to figure out what should my plan of action be, where do I spend my time, and if I'm going to start continuing to build out my tool belt, what are some places I some experiments, whether it is conferences or trying to do webinars or doing white papers and sending them out, whatever that might be. The last place that we found over time, as the product got more built out, we had a couple of reliable customers. We could just go to our investors or advisors and say, look, we've got some traction going here. Can you start introducing us to people in the industry that you know? So that turned out to be a third part of our revenue acquisition portfolio. But we did that in a very patient way. We didn't ask for advisors and investors to introduce us to top-level bank executives right out of the gate, simply because they wouldn't be willing to do it because they didn't have any success, right? So these are just examples where, for us, our prospecting plan of action became very efficient, so it was an emergent strategy. And then ultimately what that led to was building out a revenue acquisition portfolio, which was some outbound work that I was doing, some work via conferences, and some coming in from introductions and referrals. So eventually we ended up doing some big PR stuff. We got articles in Fortune magazine, things like that, earlier part of this year. But so if you're thinking about, just to give you some action items here, if you're thinking about some experiments to run, thinking about ways to start creating a better plan of action for yourself, there's webinars is one place. Another thing I suggest are definitely conferences. So one of the things that I've done for clients in the past, or had clients do, is figure out what are all conferences that are relevant to you in your industry. Spend a half a day, like just Google the heck out of conferences and your topics that you care about. Find industry organizations that are running different conferences and just create a little spreadsheet for yourself. Figure out, okay, when is the conference? Where is the conference? What's the registration fee? What if I was going to pay for a sponsorship or a booth? Is there any speaker submissions? Because maybe I can figure out a way to get on stage. And start to create for yourself, okay, where are some places I can maybe, if I'm in San Francisco, maybe I just go to the Service Experience Conference because it's local. It's going to save me some money. I don't have to pay for travel costs, right? Another place you can do, same thing as it's an event, but it's much more local, things like meetups. Right? You can go to a meetup, and while you might not get access to high-level executives, at least you can sort of practice your conversation, practice your pitch a little bit, and just kind of see if this is something that's low time investment. You go to a meetup event every week, and are you getting some leads coming out of that? Are you learning from it? You can also build case studies, see if those are useful for you as well. So another experiment might be thinking about Facebook or our ads on Twitter or LinkedIn advertising. I just want to be really clear. You want to avoid the kind of shiny red ball thing. So just don't try to do, I'm going to go do a conference this week, and I'm going to do a webinar, and I'm going to build a case study, and I'm going to do LinkedIn ads. I'm going to try to do that all this month. Because if you do that, you're not going to get the focus and the attention on each one of those in order to measure the results that you can. Okay. So, I'm going to take a break because I know I've been going on for a little while. Tell me what questions you have so far. Type in a question or two if you have one. I know some people are taking notes. There's a lot of information all at once. Tell me what's been useful or what questions you might have so far. So one question here is, like, how do I know the spending, if we're going to be running, let's go back real quick, we're going to be doing these experiments, how do I know which experiment I should be running first? And part of that is a little bit of intuition. Part of it, though, is also a little bit of your own personality, right? So if you are the kind of person that likes to present, likes to share information, likes to do research, well, and your market is one where you can educate your market about problems that they have and new approaches to solve them, then doing things like a webinar would be a place that I would experiment. Because if you're naturally gravitating towards, like, you enjoy doing presentations like this, you enjoy going and creating research and sharing it with people, well, that is just a natural way to go to the next place. Now, if you're the kind of person that likes to go out and meet people, you're an extrovert, and you're not shy about walking up to somebody at a conference and say, hey, John, I see you're at Bank of America. What brings you to the conference? If you're not shy about that, and you've never done a bunch of conferences with your startup, then I would strongly suggest doing that first. So kind of just go with whatever seems intuitively right for you. Do what you enjoy. And if you, on the other hand, if you're the kind of person who's like, I hate Facebook, I never spend time on Facebook, I don't get it, I don't know why people spend all these hours and hours on Facebook, well then don't make that an experiment. Don't make Facebook ads an experiment, because you're not going to enjoy that process, right? Here's a good question. What channels work better for B2B service sales, B2B service sales, like large amounts. So by service sales, I'm assuming that means like consulting services. Is that right? Consulting services and big ticket items. So we're talking about like 100K to dollar deals. So a couple things that tend to work really well, and this is kind of proven from other bigger companies that do this all the time. So if you look at some of the big consulting firms like Accenture, or PwC, or McKinsey, they're constantly doing webinars and they're constantly doing white papers. And that's their opportunity to create thought leadership in a market, in a certain channel, in a segment. And so if you're selling big ticket items, and those big ticket items are basically people hiring you for your expertise, well then your prospecting shouldn't be cold calling people and say, hey, can I talk to you about XYZ problem you have, and hoping that they're going to take the time and then eventually write you $1 million check. Instead, what you're probably going to have to do is create for yourself a persona in the market, some expertise, something, and this is actually really helpful for the next section we're going to talk about called permission-based selling. Once you have that content, it's an opportunity for you to show that expertise to get people to kind of opt in for a sales conversation. So that would be my recommendation. If you're doing consulting work, then you'd want to focus in on content and information that allows you to educate people, whether that is white paper or webinar or finding ways to get on stage at even small events, small conferences, so that you can start to build up some credibility for people that, hey, I was speaking at such and such event, so that you have an opportunity to showcase what you know about a certain industry. Good question, good question. All right, so if you think about your plan of action, what would be, if you think about your business right now, before we get into the third section that we're going to cover today. Think about your business right now, and given what you know now about building out a prospecting plan of action, for you in your business, what would be, in your mind, the best experiment for you to run? Or what would be your next step as part of filling out your prospecting plan of action? I want to hear from you on this. I want to hear, type in the question box, type in the chat box. What do you feel like for you would be the right place to experiment? Or what do you feel like, and if you have questions too, type the questions in the chat, the question box as well. Here's a question on prospecting on LinkedIn. How about prospecting on LinkedIn? So this is actually, that is a really good question that's going to bring us into the next section. So I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. Is that clear? I want to make sure that you guys are getting the concepts that I'm sharing here. I teach a lot of classes in the classroom, and both in workshops that I'm doing at shared workspaces and incubators and things like that. And I also teach occasionally at university. So when I'm in a classroom, I'm in a workshop, I get to see people, and I get to see if it's for them. I get to see the eyes open up or not. So on the webinar, it's always tough for me. And so if you have some questions, and also if you think about the way that I'm presenting this, is this useful, right? Is this a new way for you? Is this a line in the sand that you can then move forward with a really specific plan to do your prospecting the right way without, ultimately what we're doing here is how to fill your pipeline without wasting time, right? So here's another question, a backlog of next steps when having a table of graded customer accounts and how to plan to upsell it. Yes, let's cover that at the end, Kenny. These are good questions. I want to cover that at the end. For sure, remind me if I get to the end during the Q&A and I don't cover it, just remind me, okay? All I was saying, finding clusters of companies that are in more or less the same situation with similar needs and pains. Yeah. So, is that a suggestion or is that a question? Is that a suggestion or is that a question? Because oftentimes, if you're looking for clusters of companies that are more or less in the same situation with similar needs and pains, there are one of the reasons that we went to these, I listed all these different conferences. If you kind of take a second and look at the topics that were covered. So this is a conference just around legal issues and regulatory compliance. This one down here is all around technology. This one's about housing finance. This is about mortgage servicing. So typically within a specific industry, you're going to have a big master conference, like a big annual conference around that organization or around that industry. And then throughout the year, they kind of have these breakouts. And whether you're going to these big conferences or you're going to smaller events that might be locally hosted by smaller trade organizations, typically, if you're going to an event around, in this case, like technology and mortgage banking, then it's most likely that people that are coming to those conferences are going to be either thought leaders or they're people that are looking for answers to their questions. They're looking for solutions to their problems that they have. Okay. So that's a way to get clusters of companies, and it's also a way to be really efficient with your time. If you set up your conferences the right way, if you're setting up meetings, if you're knocking down 10 meetings in 2 days or 15 meetings over 3 days, then that's a chance for you to spend that intensive amount of time from a revenue acquisition standpoint and get some bang for that buck. So yes, it takes me a little bit of time to set up meetings. I have to go, I have to travel, maybe it's 3 or 4 days of total time. But if out of that 3 or 4 day time investment, I'm getting 3 or 4 solid leads in my sales pipeline, well then that should be part of your revenue acquisition portfolio. Cool. Thanks, Ola. Right, so let's jump into the last topic here that we want to cover. We've got just a couple of minutes left. And the last thing I find that people tell me is pretty frustrating is when you're sitting down, even if you have a list. I know that some companies will build a list through a virtual assistant, or they'll figure out some way to kind of get like a big email list or a big list of people to call, and you're firing off emails and you're just not getting replies, or the people that are replying to you are saying, no thanks, or busy, or check back with me in a couple of months, right? And it's super frustrating. You can't even get like 15 minutes on the phone with them. You're trying to make it really low friction for them to engage with you. Like, hey, this is our problem, doing my outreach. I saw that you're an executive at this company. Could I get 10 minutes on the phone? You can't even get that, right? Super, super frustrating. And I think like the biggest fear is like, man, is what I'm doing valuable? Like, why don't people care? If this is not valuable, then maybe that's why they don't care. They just don't see the value. And what we want to get is a place for people to opt in to the sales funnel for us, instead of us chasing and trying to grab 15 minutes from somebody. What if it was the other way around? What if we could get them to go, oh, this sounds interesting, I would love to talk with you, right? Getting those excited customers, getting the meetings with the top executives. That's what we really want, right? And so this brings us to the third topic that I want to talk through, and it's called permission-based selling. Permission-based selling. And hopefully you're seeing how these all kind of stack onto each other. So permission-based selling starts with a simple question, and that is, are you creating value? Are you creating value? And what I mean by that, when you're doing your outreach, when you're having your conversations, when you're meeting people either at a conference or you're doing your emails, are you simply asking them for time? Are you looking to literally grab 15 minutes of their time? Or is there a way for you to create value somehow? Right? And this is what I mean by permission-based selling. Instead of saying, hey, can I grab 15 minutes? What if you turned it around and said, look, I just attended a conference, and one of the sessions was led by, this is just a fake email I typed up, one of the sessions was led by John Smith. It was really insightful. I typed up a summary of the session. Would you like to get a copy of my notes and the presentation deck I downloaded from the conference website? Think about that for a second. Here's another example. Hey, in our research, a lot of companies like you in your industry seem to struggle with APC problems. Right? We just published a blog post with 3 strategies to overcome this. Can I send you a link? Okay. You see the difference here from, hey, can I grab 15 minutes, to what I call permission-based selling. And the thing that's really interesting about this is you're going to get some people that just ignore you, and you're not going to get a response. But the people that are truly interested in solving the problem, they first have the problem, and secondly, they're interested in solving that problem. If you're adding value to them by saying, hey, I'm going to send you these notes, I'm going to send you this presentation deck, do you want to see a link to, do you want to get a link to our blog post? Or may I send you the white paper that we just published? Or would you be interested in attending a webinar? What you're doing, this is the opt-in piece, because all that person has to do is reply back and go, yeah, Right? It's a yes, no, right? And that's the very first thing we want to do. We just want to get that little tether between us and that ideal customer that we're out there targeting and saying to them, are you interested in having a conversation with me? And if they say yes, now you know, you go, great, I'll send you the white paper in an email. What's your email address? Let's say you're doing this in LinkedIn, and you don't have your email address, you get that. And then when you send the white paper, now you have an opportunity to follow up with them. It's like, hey, I'm going to send you this white paper. I'd love to get your thoughts on it. How about we schedule some time on Friday after you've had a chance to take a look at it? Now, instead of saying, can I grab 15 minutes on the phone, what you're saying is, I'm going to give you something that's valuable, something that's thoughtful, something that's interesting, and then we can have a conversation about it. It fundamentally shifts the way that you're doing your outbound, you're doing your prospecting. And that's why I always start with that question that I said, which is, hey, are you creating value for people? So yes, we want to talk to people, and yes, we want to sell a product. In order to get people to spend time with us, we have to show them that we're interested in the problem and we're interested in giving them ideas of how we can solve it. So when I talk about permission-based selling, all you're doing is asking for permission to send them stuff that's valuable to them. And once they say yes, now you've got somebody who could be a really good target for you. And then you kind of pull them through the rest of your sales process. Okay? So I did this a lot when I was at Outpost Research. So we were a startup. We were selling housing data to the financial market, to banks. And one of the things that we started doing, we took our own data and we kind of aggregated it on a monthly basis for like 50 markets across the U.S. And it was this little 3-page housing market report. And so as I was going out to do my outreach to analysts and mortgage bond traders and banks that were making loans, right? All of these people needed this housing data. At least I felt like they needed this housing data. And so, of course, if I just asked them, could I grab a few minutes of your time, very few people, unless I happened to hit the bullet with the bullet, they had this desperate need for housing data, they were going to answer me back. But if instead I said, hey, just came across your profile. I saw that you were at XYZ conference and that you're an analyst over at TCW. We publish this housing market report every single month. And in fact, we just published the report for May. Can I send you a copy? Would you like to see a copy? And if that person says yes, great. Is there anybody else at your company that should receive a copy of this as well? Oh, yeah, actually, in addition to sending it to me, you should be sending it to Alan and Mary and Sarah because they also work with me here on the trading desk. Okay, cool. So now all of a sudden I've created that tether just by using something really simple. And so it doesn't take a lot to do this value-based marketing. As much as a housing report might sound daunting or doing a webinar might sound daunting, it can be as simple as a collection of blog posts or a collection of articles that you've went out and done the research on. Go to Google News and find key topics in the industries that you focus on and get a catalog or a library of 5, 10, 15 articles that are really good, really insightful, and just do that kind of research and say, hey, John, I saw that you cover the housing market at TCW. One of the things I do is read about the housing market all the time, and I have a couple of articles I think you would find interesting. Would you like to get links to those articles that I found? Right? Again, you're just using the system prospecting. You're just trying to see who is willing to opt in to a conversation with you, right? So think about this for your business. As we kind of wrap up here, how could you do this? How could you use this for your business? How could you use this for your industry? Do you think, is this useful? Can you think of a way that you can do this permission-based selling? What would be a way that you can do permission-based selling in your own business, whether you're selling consulting services or software or tahini sauce? What are some ways for you to think about deploying this permission-based selling? Even if you're starting a startup and you don't have a ton of content, what are some things that you can add? What are some ways that you can add value to get people to opt in? Sharing examples. Oh, that's a really good one. Yeah. So, like, if you've got some cases of companies, whether they're companies that you've worked with, or at least companies that you know have achieved the results that the company you're targeting has wants to get, then that is a way for you to say, look, there is a path forward, right? You've got this problem. Another company like you had this problem. Ideally, if you could do a case study that says, hey, we helped you, we helped this company solve this problem. But a lot of times it's just the people that we're talking to are so mired in their day-to-day they're lost in their own bureaucracy. They don't get a chance to go and see what other companies are doing. So just sharing some examples is great. Writing out special white papers with their expertise. Yeah, that's another good one. White papers can seem pretty daunting, and I know some of the more technical ones can be 25 pages long with lots of data and lots of examples. White papers don't always have to be that way. A simple framework is, here is a problem that we're seeing in the market. Here are 3 suggestions, or here are 5 suggestions. Here are 5 strategies, right? Each one is a paragraph or 2. It could be a 3-page PDF. You wrap it up and you call it a white paper. It's good enough. The expertise that you have is going to be valuable. And it just shows the market that you're willing to contribute to the solution, not just try to sell stuff. Cool. Great. Great job, everyone. So these are the 3 topics I want to cover today. So what was your revenue acquisition portfolio? So that's something you want to go take a look at. Secondly, give you some ideas on how to build a prospecting plan of action. And then thirdly, we talked about permission-based selling. Right? So, now what do we do now? So one of the things that I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation is that I was going to share a way to get some more help if you wanted it. So one of the things you can do, and we'll jump over to some more open Q&A in just a minute, is if you go to calendly.com/salesqualia/20. So one of the things that I do for people is what I call a startup selling strategy call. So a lot of folks will come to a webinar like this, or they'll read some stuff that I've done, and say, well, how do I deploy this specifically for my business? Right? Because it's hard for me to talk about every single use case for every single industry and every single kind of product, right? But conceptually, people say, man, these are really, really good ideas. I want to start working through this. I want to start deploying some of these ideas. How do I do that? What are some of the biggest obstacles that I might face in my business right now? And so this 20-minute call is designed for us to help you identify what some of the biggest obstacles might be. What are some of the things that are maybe holding you back or keeping you from getting to where you need to go? So if you want to schedule that time, I've blocked out some time over the next week. You can see Tuesday is completely unavailable because I'm already booked up with clients all day. But you'll see throughout the course of Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday next week, you'll see different time blocks. So when you go to calendly.com/salesqualia/20, you just pick a day, click a time, and then book that time, and we'll be good to go. So if you're thinking about, how could you put some of this to work for yourself? If you think about it, you want some additional help getting your business straight or identifying big obstacles and how to work around those, then this is definitely a good opportunity for you. It's totally free, by the way. And some people ask me, do I charge for this? No, I don't charge for this at all. And it's just something I want to do as a thank you gift for the people that come to the webinar. And like I said, give you if you want it. So while we're doing that, I do want to flip over to some quick Q&A, for people. So I'm going to go through the chat box, and there's some people ask some questions I didn't get a chance to get to. So in the meantime, let me go back. I know, Kenny, you had a question earlier about a backlog of next steps with having a table of created customer accounts and how to plan and queue upselling. So let me tackle the first one, the second one first. So how to plan and queue upselling. So if you have an existing client, right, maybe they're producing a small amount of revenue for you, and there's opportunity to grow. One of the things that I always suggest doing with clients, especially as you're first bringing them on, is begin with what I call a monthly business review, and call it this with your clients. Say, look, now that we're up and running, everything seems to be going well, really happy with the product, really happy with the service. What we want to do is book in 20 minutes, 30 minutes at the end of each month, and just do a quick business review. How are things going? And then at the end, when you go to that monthly review, or quarterly, sometimes it's a quarterly business review, go to that with some really specific ideas that, based on the interactions, based on the work that you've already done for that client, say, look, we've done some really great things, and there's some recommendations. There's some open loops here that I'm seeing. And one of the things that I think we might do is consider how we can expand the engagement, whether that's more seats, if it's a software license, or it's more training, or it's more coaching, or it's a bigger engagement to work with other offices that might be related in other locations, whatever that is. So just by having a scheduled meeting, that's one way to kind of, in a way, it helps you. It does your prospecting for you. because it's a service to the client because you're giving them updates on how things are going, you're staying in touch with them. But also, once that client's paying you money, they're probably happy to take your recommendations because you're inside the walls of their company. You understand how things are working or not working, and then they need that third-party point of view. So that would be one thing I would say in terms of planning on upselling. Second is handling a backlog of next steps when having a table of created customer accounts. So from a prospecting standpoint, this sounds like, okay, I've got some people I've talked with. There's some kind of next step, whether they said they'd get back to me or I was going to get back to them, and I'm just not keeping up with that. So what I would do is just maybe break out that list. If it's 10, if it's 50, I don't know how they got listed for you. I would just kind of break it out into 2 or 3 piles, right? So the first pile would be, these are customers I definitely want to work with, and I feel like there's a good opportunity if we can get the next step going to get a deal going, right? So that's going to be your top priority. The second are like, well, it could be a good customer, but it seems pretty wishy-washy, and I'm not really sure of the urgency. And then the third are people that you kind of wish you never even talked to in the first place. And maybe that's why you never followed up with them and it wasn't urgent for you. You're like, I don't know, maybe this is not a great customer, maybe they're going to be too needy, maybe they're going to want too much of a discount, whatever that is. And just focus on the first 2, right? So obviously, the one thing I would say is for the people that are urgent for you is simply say, look, I realize now it's been 3 weeks since our last call, and this is the critical part of this message for you. I realize it's been 3 weeks since our last call. We were scheduled to do a quick follow-up, and we haven't done that yet. I've been thinking about our last conversation, and I have 2 or 3 ideas I want to run by you. I've been thinking about our last conversation, and I have 2 or 3 ideas I want to run by you. When can we schedule 20 minutes to talk? Right. So the idea here is you're piquing interest. You're getting somebody to, you're like, oh, okay, Kenny has some ideas for me. Yeah, totally. I'm totally happy to talk about that. So that's the kind of thing that you might want to think about in terms of pulling those people through, right? Cool. All right, let's see if there's some other questions here really quickly. I think that covers it for now. All right, awesome. Cool. All right, great, everyone. Thank you. Thanks very much for the time. Oh, wait, here's one quick one. Is there a way to invert the funnel pyramid? Small number of leads generate a large amount of money. Yeah, so inverting the funnel, basically that gets down to just being really, really good at targeting. And that's where, like, oftentimes if you're doing a lot of big outbound work, like lots of email messages, lots of LinkedIn stuff, lots of conferences, it's a numbers game, right? So it's for every 20 emails I send, I'm going to get 3 or 4 replies and maybe 1 or 2 good meetings. But on the other hand, if you're able to get good at using your network, using your connections, and that is something, if you feel like, man, I know I've been in an issue for a long period of time, I know that there are people that I could help with my product or service, I'm just not good at using my network, then that would be an experiment to run. That would be a project I would set up for myself. Say, look, over the next month, in addition to the stuff I'm already doing around prospecting, I am going to deliberately spend time getting good at asking for introductions, right? I'm an entrepreneur. I need help. It's okay to ask for help. And I'm going to go through my network. If I've got 1,000 LinkedIn connections, I'm going to go to LinkedIn and download my list of connections and just kind of sort through and say, okay, these of the 1,000, these 100 are people that I think could potentially introduce me to folks at other companies that could be potential users for me. And then deliberately and specifically going through and doing 10 emails a day to that network and saying, listen, we're connected on LinkedIn. It's been a while since we chatted. I've got this company that solves this problem. It looks like you know so-and-so at XYZ company. Would you mind doing a quick introduction? Or, hey, I'm going to reach out to that person. Would it be okay if I mentioned that you and I are connected, or that you and I are former colleagues or friends, right? And again, just like this is not something you just do one time for one afternoon and say, well, I tried to get 4 introductions and it didn't work. If this is something that you are serious about learning how to do and you think it could be part of your revenue acquisition portfolio, then run that experiment and focus in on it. That's what I would say, Henry. Then one last question here, because I know we're running over time. Let me see. Oh, is penetrating large Fortune 100 companies require different techniques for a small company? Yeah, I would say so. I think generally speaking, I mean, you can take the long, slow road, which is, try to meet somebody at a conference and then kind of work your way through the committee, trying to, work your way through decision makers. Ultimately, what I found is what's called a top, not just a top-down, but I would say top-down, bottom-up. So combining those two strategies. So yes, you definitely want to go and do the bottom-up strategy if it means meeting one person at a time and slowly introducing them to what you do and understanding more about the needs of the company, and then getting another conversation with the second person, mid-level of the organization. Yeah, you need to do that. You also need to figure out ways to get a top-level introduction. So what you're trying to do is kind of work from the top down and the bottom up, so that you can refer to each other and say, and if it means working really hard through your network to get that top-level introduction, then work that as part of your prospecting while you're trying to get in touch with the mid-level people who might be more receptive to an out or out. So, and there's lots of different strategies on how to get that top-level introduction, whether it's through network or going to conferences, or at least seeing who's speaking at conferences. Another strategy which was useful for me, particularly at Altos, was making friends with the writers and bloggers in the industry, in the housing industry. There are a couple of housing industry-specific websites, and those writers and bloggers are always looking for content. They also have access to big executives, because that's who they're writing to, and that's who they're writing about. That's who they're getting quotes from. So if you can offer some value to those writers and bloggers, say, look, in our case at Altos, we'd say, look, anytime you're writing an article around the market and market conditions, let me know, and I'll send you whatever housing data we have that's useful for you. And in some cases, I even put together graphs and charts for them that they use. So I just throw in a favor their way, and that way I can turn around and go, oh, Jordan, by the way, I saw that you just wrote an article where you were talking to Doug Smith over at Chase, JP Morgan Chase. Do you know him well enough that you would be willing to do a quick introduction for me? So that's a way to do like a top-down approach in order to penetrate some of those big companies, those big executives. So cool. Well, great. Well, listen, everyone. I know that we are a little bit past time. Thanks so much for the questions. If you have more questions, like I said, just book some time with me here and grab a 20-minute spot. There's a few available. They're not super flexible because I'm spending a lot of time working with clients, as Kenny and some other folks here will tell you. But definitely, if you have some questions and you want a little bit more help, totally the opportunity for us to grab a minute, right? So thanks again, everyone. Thanks for spending part of your day with me. I really enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. And we will do it again in a couple of weeks. So look for the next round of teaching webinar from me. This is Scott Sabrici over at Sales Calling, and signing off.